6-month cycle, okay? What the movements like Akpor in Serbia and other places, they developed a grand strategy that was multi-year with many different campaigns and many different demands that were symbolic within it that moved the population all around one major popular demand, one major thing. Okay? So the grand strategy is a way in which you basically take the theory of change and formulate it for your people. You say, this is the grand strategy of the movement. Now, I'm not going to, and the grand strategy is how to take the theory of change, and in the model that we're sort of talking about is the hybrid model in civil resistance. They generally talk about doing that within 2 to 5 year cycles, okay? Now, people always ask me, and I think this is really helpful, a lot of people make comments about this, well, this is a popular movement. But on the long term, there's a bigger strategy, right, that you can develop. And that's like the grand strategy, right? And that might be ending capitalism, right? But the popular movement needs one in which everyone could gravitate to that isn't just anti-capitalist, right? So they need a strategy that can build a popular front around it. So we're talking about that. Can there be a grand strategy with multiple grand strategies? Yes. Are we going to talk about that? No. We need to do another training and another understanding of how to have mini movement ecology and how to do large-scale, multi-year, institutional building and whatever. And quite frankly, I'm not an expert on that. So, but what we're talking about is a model and a theory that allows you to build a decentralized popular movement. So. And this has happened already in the momentum tradition in the United States of America, in that in the global justice movement, strategies were developed generally around an action scenario, which is we were going to go down to WTO and we were going to shut down the meeting, and there was this huge framework and meta narrative, the Carnival of Resistance, that was really pitched as sort of like, come to this thing, and it all had a theory of change in it, it had everything in it. And everyone joined the movement with that framework, right? But the problem with that is that after that strategy fell apart, or whatever, it was done, then there was a scrambling for what the next one was. And it wasn't it wasn't a very good strategic debate about what the next one should be. It was just a replication of another 6-month cycle and doing exactly the same thing with the IMF and World Bank. So what we advise and what the Akpor model advises is that you have a general grand strategy where you do the metrics that we talked about between the two things around the grand strategy, and then you allow people to formulate many different campaigns, many different tactics that are all around that.
I think also another thing that I would add, Paul, is that Gandhi really viewed this as a 2 to 5 year cycle campaigns. So he would think about that in 2 to 5 years he will go to what he called nonviolent warfare, and then he will retreat and actually build the structure, the political party of the Indian National Congress, and then when the moment was right, he'll go back to war for a couple of years. So it is just a way to organize the strategy. Doesn't mean that just whatever happens in this grand strategy is finite. We have to do multiple cycles of this. So let's look at the next piece. So can everybody see this somewhere? No, it's not. Okay, let me. Can you put it in the binder?
I think the last one, the foldable one.
The folded one has a little bit of it.
The fold. Okay.
This is all the way.
Yeah. Yes. There's all in the one. But if you go to the last page of your binder, in the ¿cómo dice penúltima?
Second to last.
Thank you so much. Second to last. You can see. You can see that we have the pyramid too, which has pretty much here to the top, the people that can't see it, sorry about the colors. It has grand strategic objective. Can everybody say grand strategic objective with me?
Grand strategic objective.
Great. Then the next one is phases. Can you say phases with me?
Phases.
Then campaigns.
Campaigns.
And then tactics.
Tactics.
Perfect. I feel like I'm in an ESL classroom again. Okay. So I just want to introduce this for a second because I know that many of you are thinking about, well, Carlos, how do we do this stuff more deeply? How do we launch a cycle of momentum or a movement around this, and we really want you to think that we're gonna try to fill as much of this out throughout the week, which is this is what we're calling movement DNA, so that you can really think about what's your objective, how everything fits, who are the people that are part of that, what is your meta-narrative, meta-branding, which we're gonna go over more in detail tomorrow, so don't worry, we don't know all the details about this. But also, what I want us to say before we go over this is that this takes a lot of planning and time. This doesn't take a 2-hour, or a 60-minute conference call. Has anybody been in a conference call? I'm sorry. I'm in those all the time too. So let's explain this a little bit more deeply. So Paul, do you want to go through?
Yes, sure. So,
Yeah.
the ground strategic amendment, we're going to talk about this, is the broadest concept of what the movement seeks to win. So, in the immigrant rights movement, that most people involved in the immigrant rights movement would see comprehensive immigration reform as it. Now, that doesn't mean that the campaigns or the DREAM Act, it might be that DREAM Act activists actually consider the movement to be around DREAM Act. And that might be a campaign, and people might affiliate more with the campaign. The question is whether or not it's you put it in campaigns, phases, and grand strategy. I want to say it's very subjective. Like, was the DREAM Act a movement in itself, or was it a campaign within the broader campaign within the winning comprehensive immigration reform? That's subjective. That's subjective. But this framework really helps you think and unify your movement around the theory of change in a common strategy. It allows the DREAM Act students to realize what they're doing in proportion to the whole, to the entire movement of winning comprehensive immigration reform. Does that make sense? So the broadest conception of what the movement seeks to win would be like comprehensive immigration reform. Achieving its strategic objective is the ultimate goal of the movement. It is almost the final victory be won. And also the grand strategic objective includes the method at which you're going to win. Okay, we're gonna do a little bit of training on strategic objective, but that would be like, for instance, in the civil rights movement, they knew they had we're going to go over it. They knew they had to have local campaigns that were more symbolic, but in the end, they knew they had to win federal legislation to enforce anti-segregation and voting rights. So they really knew that there was a mechanism that kind of emerged out of the movement to do that. So the phases are the major objectives that serves as benchmark achievements as the movement approaches the final victory. This is primarily a timeline to assess the movement progress. Okay. So Bill Moyer says that generally movements have 2 or 3 phases, and if you go through the steps, the phases in your book, what page, I don't know.
69.
69, he goes through phases of the movement, right? And it's really helpful to clarify that for your movement. So for instance, we were talking before that it makes sense to go more instrumental, winning instrumental stuff after you win great public support for something. So the first phase could be like, our movement needs to be this big and it needs to have popular support. So in Serbia, the first phase was Otpor has to be throughout the country, and it has to mobilize passive public support to a majority, was the first phase against Milosevic. That was the first phase of their movement. And so they got everyone focused on that. Well, that wasn't the end goal. The end goal was a general strike, okay? And that was their strategic objective, was a general strike to overthrow Milosevic, to enforce the results of the election, and then to have a democratic transition to parliamentary democracy, okay? So the campaigns would then be the plan of action designed to achieve a phase of objectives, making demands on power holders. Sometimes those aren't demands, sometimes those are strategic objectives that contains a series of nonviolent tactics used to apply pressure, okay? So now that let's say you're going to do immigration reform. DREAM Act, winning the DREAM Act, does that help you win popular support for comprehensive immigration reform? Yes. Can it be considered a campaign within the grand strategy? Yes, it can. In this model that we're talking about, this allows for a lot of decentralization, because a lot of the campaigns can all be developed bottom up. You don't have to necessarily create the campaigns. If you teach everyone around a grand strategy, they can develop campaigns to move forward the grand strategic objective. That's very hard to do unless everyone shares in the same metrics, the same grand strategy, and an understanding of the phases. If you don't have that, it's very hard to be decentralized because everyone's fighting over different conflicting theories of change, different strategies, different whatever. So in the first phase of Akbor, which was building passive public support, people developed lots of local campaigns to fight against the dictator, and they developed them with symbolic demands and with symbolic and strategic objectives in dramatically different ways all over the country. And what they just did is did an orientation that just taught them the top and the middle.
Did everybody got this one? Sorry, I see some people already.
And we're going to go into tactics, but tactics are things you do within your campaign to win.
And team, just to make a note, a point of this, we are all very used to campaigns and tactics, is that correct?
Yes.
You have one campaign and you have hundreds of different activities within them, right? What we're essentially just adding is 2 more pieces to the pie. We're saying, how do we make that in phases so that it's more distributed through a longer length of time, right? So it's that allows multiple campaigns to live in. And then we're saying, well, what is the one thing that ties the whole thing up? Are you following us on this? Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take a couple of thoughts.
What was an example of phase in the immigration reform example?
So let's go through
Yeah,
examples.
we have some
Oh, you have
examples.
it.
Let's go through examples.
Let's rock and roll. And also, if you didn't capture all this, don't worry. We have
We're going to have examples.
all
and
the
then we'll take
all the
questions.
presentations. We can email them to you. You can have all of them too.
Just a
Rock
quick
and roll.
question around the grand strategic objective. It is measurable though. So for
That's
example, immigration reform is measurable, whereas, for example, immigrants being included in society is a little more vision-y, bigger, broader. Because right, so I'm just trying to like differentiate.
It
Because I would
depends.
say that immigration reform is like an objective towards a certain kind of society. Does that make sense?
What you establish is the grand strategy. Some people might think it's a grand strategy. Other people might think it's just a campaign. You get to define that within your own movement. What is the grand strategic objective? What is campaigns or what is? Does that make sense? Go ahead.
I guess I'm wondering about, like, so campaigns already exist, like, and then it doesn't seem like you'd be, like, creating, like, discovering some new issue silo, that there's so much that exists, and it seems like there would be a lot of sort of data collection required in order to fill out what those campaigns already are. So I'm wondering how much is, and maybe you'll get to this, but how much of this is sort of working backwards to figure out kind of what the field is already, and what sort of fits under that. Because I know the idea is that everything fits under the grand strategy, so everything's driving towards a grand strategy, but how do things work that's already happening, how does that kind of play into like a grand strategy around something like climate change or immigration reform, where there are already so many organizations?
So in this model, in the theory that we're teaching, in the model that we're going to get into, a lot of how that happens is they do mass training where you train people in the theory of change and you agree on a common strategic objective. And then people still run their campaigns, but they understand how it fits in and they reorient, just like all of you are reorienting. How would I run a campaign differently to win popular support? But you realize that you have a common ecosystem from the bottom up that helps the common movement. That's what they did in Serbia.
And
Does
also,
that make
just,
sense?
just to add to this, that is the battle of every movement within the movement. What is the movement going to focus on? So for example, in migrant rights, the battle is still to this day, I think, is the battle between do we pass legislation, which is comprehensive immigration reform, or do we pressure the president to stop deportations? And you can literally see the movement trying to like see who freaking wins to get everybody in which page. You know, so to me that's the movement right now, and we have to figure out what's the best strategic objective for the whole movement for the next couple of years. But the movement is in a battle of that. It's real. Maybe people, it's not explicit, but it's real.
Yeah.
And for us in the Dream Act movement, there was a time when we had to topple that down, right? Because the top was comprehensive immigration reform. We said, no, the focus is the Dream Act. And there was a huge movement fight around that. Because we were literally changing the strategic objective of the whole migrant rights movement. Can you imagine a lot of people getting frustrated? So it's a battle. I just want to say it's not just like you just said it. It's going to have a whole engagement of people already doing stuff.
But I would say that when I was part of the immigrant rights movement and we had a coalition together with DreamAct students, I actually think that they made an argument that the best campaign to do was to win the DREAM Act. And because it was a symbolic demand that we can mobilize the base and the public understood. And so I actually said, that's right. Like, it's a great campaign to get you more popular support around comprehensive immigration reform. And that's actually what happened. In the end, that revived the movement and won something that moved everyone towards immigration reform.
I don't technically agree with that, but that's okay. Because I think that what happened is that, and we can get more into the details of it, but I actually think that, can we all create a strategic objective and sub-strategic objectives? Can we all do that? We can get into that, right? So I actually think that what I want you to get, the reason why I'm disagreeing is because within the DREAM movement, there were tons of campaigns.
That's right.
So it isn't fair to say that the DREAM Act was just one campaign. I think to us, we had a strategic objective, and then we had gazillions of campaigns and multiple phases. There was a phase of putting the DREAM Act to a vote, there was a phase of going after Obama. So, and I think the problem is that the movement, the immigrant rights movement, completely lost momentum and went into perception of failure after Obama didn't pass anything in 2009, and everyone is like, well, let's just go to that pyramid because the other pyramid is kind of like broken into pieces. And now in some ways the pyramid for the immigrant rights movement has been recreated against deportations. So that's why I'm just for the,
Yeah, I mean, I
for the
think,
technicality of the exercise.
I don't want to get into the details, but I think that it's about how you frame what a campaign is and what the grand
That
strategy
is correct. Yes,
I'm just wondering, it seems like, I can understand making a grand strategic objective for your issue. And it also seems like somebody else might be able to make you a campaign of their grand strategic objective, right? Like, depending on like, another organization that might be working meta above you might
That is
consider
correct.
you part of their campaign,
That's
right?
That's right. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Oh, no, I was just,
Like,
I'm just trying to get.
But it's a process of organization, of strategy, that's right.
Just in responding to Kate, is there like a tool that somebody who's trying to analyze the field to prepare their campaigns for this could use to understand the framework? 'Cause I think
Yes.
that's-
Yvonne Marovic and Canvas, they do lots and lots of training just to do what they call strategic estimation, grand strategy development, pillars analysis. They do all these exercises to analyze what would be a good strategic objective. We're gonna